Okay, well, tonight we're going to go into Hebron. It's a very famous city. I'm going to show you where it's at here. The map I'm going to start sharing here. So this will give you perspective. This is a map that you've seen quite a few times, and this will give you an idea of where it's at. So let me see here. It's there. Take just a second. I don't see it, but I'll fix that. That down, and then there we go. All right, we're getting close. Okay, here's a map of Israel, and we're going to be focusing on a town that is to the west of the Dead Sea. It's called Hebron. It's right there. You can see there, and you can see where Bethlehem is north. So is Jerusalem, and we have other cities around here, Jericho up to the north, but there's your Dead Sea, and there's Hebron. So we're going to be focusing on that tonight. Some of the things that you're probably familiar with, it's called this Abraham city. Of course, Abraham lived, he was in that era of time about 1800 BC. And that's a while ago, and that's where he pitched his tents in the Oaks of Mamre. And I'm going to show you some of these pictures now where you can, this is where his tomb is located. This is in Hebron, and I'm getting some noise here. If you're not muted, if you could mute yourself, because I'm getting some kind of a hiss sound. I appreciate that, thank you. But this is a temple that inside, this is a mosque actually. And I'm sorry, no, this is the Hebron, in Hebron, where the graves they claim of Abraham and his wife, Jacob's there, Isaac's there, Leah and Rachel, they're all there. And we're going to go through the records talking about the background to Abraham buying land. That's the only parcel of land that he owned. It's kind of funny that the promises kept coming over and over again that he was going to have all this land, and he hasn't had it. But we know that's going to be fulfilled in the millennial kingdom. But this is the place where the inside of this is where they are, and you can see the Israeli flags up here, and you can see the menorah here. And the pictures I just showed you are on the inside there. Here's another close-up picture. Another interesting thing, as I've told you before, if you look at these stones, and you might recall whenever you see these kinds of indentations here, that's Herod the Great's fingerprint. Whenever he was involved with building or rebuilding something, it's not for sure if he built this part, but the stones that he had made were a part of it. So there are other stones that are much older or different eras, and that's pretty common in Israel because you've got all these hundreds of years and all these rebuildings, tearing down, battles, all kinds of stuff, and they redo it. Well, this is what is called the tomb of Abraham. And you can see it both in Hebrew and in English. Now, it's guarded, as you can see. It's got chained here, and it's just kind of a room inside of a room, and that's where he's supposed to be buried. Here is another picture. This one, as you can see, is it clears up here. That is actually Jacob. Sometimes these clear up and sometimes they don't. When I share screens, that one didn't clear up very well. And then we have Leah, which was one of Jacob's wives. That was his first wife. His second wife was Rachel. You probably remember the story about him getting tricked and having Leah to be the first wife. He liked Rachel because of her pretty eyes. Probably some other things too, but it's not, this doesn't really define much, but it gives you an idea. They have these guarded off, and there they are. Now, we know in the Bible that the real graves were called the Cave of Machpelah. So this doesn't look like a cave to me. So as it is with so many things in Israel, oftentimes these are tokens, they are close, but I don't see the cave. Did they take them out and put them in these rooms? Don't know. But that's what we saw here. And it was kind of a unique area because it's a very political, volatile area, because right next door is a mausoleum. And in that mausoleum are also the tombs of Abraham and Sarah, because as you know, the Muslims hold on to Abraham as being their father, and that their lineage goes back to Abraham through his, not through Isaac, but from Hagar. That's how that went back. So they hold him and they spell Abraham a little bit differently. But since the Muslims and Arabs are so close to each other here, it's a volatile area. They've had some violence there. So when we went in, we were checked and double checked. Do we have knives? Do we have anything like that? But we got in okay. And in the Muslim mausoleum, they had a couple people walking around making sure the ladies had they gave them hooded cloaks and stuff, and made sure that they had their heads covered and their cloaks held tight. Men could walk in. Everybody had to take their shoes off, but men did not have to wear any special kind of dress. So that is Hebron. Now Hebron is far, far bigger than just a few pictures like I'm showing you now. It has so much history and so many things that are very interesting. So we're going to get into tonight, and we're going to start with just some of the historical significance and some of the things that happened. I mean, it's amazing what happened in this one town. So we're going to go through these records and just see what the word says and enjoy it, and just let it sink in and enjoy it. So we're going to start in Genesis this evening, Genesis chapter 13. And I'm going to share my screen again. So you can look it up in your own Bible, or if you want, you can just check it out on the screen, because I'll be sharing it on the screen. There we go. Okay, so the first record we're going to look at tonight that deals with Hebron is in Genesis 13. And Genesis, as Abraham came out of the Mesopotamia area, and God called him and told him to go to where he didn't say exactly where tell him where he's going to go, but he said just go, and he was going to guide them to where he needed to go. So it took a while. He stopped along the way, and then he continued, and so he finally got down into what we now call Israel, that the land down there that he was supposed to go to. So in chapter 13, verse 18, it says, and God, continues to make his reaffirmations of the blessing that he gave him before. It says in verse 14, we'll pick it up there. After Lot had separated from him, Yahweh said to Abraham, now lift up your eyes and look where you are, to the north, to the south, to the east and the west. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your seed forever. I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could count the dust of the earth, then your seed could also be counted. So get up, walk through the land, through its length and its width, because I will give it to you. And Abraham moved his tent and went and lived by the oaks of Mamre that are in Hebron, and he built an altar to Yahweh there. Let's take a look at verse 8. We'll go over to chapter 18. and we'll continue there in verse 1. We got a story here that we're going to get involved with, because this is a very interesting story. It's just an interesting story. So we're going to take the time to go through this. We're going to start here in Genesis chapter 18, starting in verse 1. And Yahweh appeared by the oaks of Mamre. And that's where we just read that Abraham was staying. That's where he pitched his tent. And he was sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. And Abraham, lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing nearby. And when he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them, and he bowed down to the ground. And he said, "My Lord, if now I have found favor in your eyes, please do not just pass your servant by, but let a little water be brought. Then wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. I will get a piece of bread so you can refresh yourselves and then pass on by. For that is why you are passing by your servant." They said, "Very well, do as you have said." So this was the response from the 3 men. Then Abraham hurried to the tent to Sarah and says, "Quick, 3 measures of fine flour, knead it and make loaves." What, anybody here make bread? It doesn't take, it's not a 5-minute deal. It's not even an hour deal. You put the yeast in, it has to rise, it takes some time. And then he doesn't have, he goes to Abraham, ran to the herd and took a tender and good calf and gave it to his servant, who hurried to prepare it. So that takes some time. Then he took curds, which is like cottage cheese, and milk, and the calf, and that he had prepared, and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. So here you have God and 2 angels eating some, looks like I would call it veal, a young calf, and they've got bread, and they've got some cheese, curds, and milk. So they're having a nice time together there. And there they are. Here they are, these spirit beings actually consuming food. It's amazing that you would actually serve God a supper. It's just almost surreal how this happens. But sure enough, that's what happened. And they asked him, "Well, where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "Here in the tent." And Abraham said, "I will return. Yes, return to you." No, God said, "I will return. Yes, return to you at this time next year. And behold, Sarah, your wife." Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind it. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old and well advanced in days, and the way of a woman had ceased to be for Sarah. And I think you all know what that means. So Sarah laughed within herself, saying, "After I am worn out, and my Lord is also old, will I have his pleasure?" But Yahweh said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, will I really give birth to a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard?" And then God comes back, "Is anything too hard for Yahweh? At the same season, I will return to you at the same time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Well, God had already told them that they were going to have a son, that his offspring would be like the sands of the sea and like dust. So he comes back, and what this is doing here is really helping Sarah to trust. She was laughing about it, and now it just helped her. It just helped her. So is anything too hard for Yahweh? No, the answer is no, it's not. So at the same season, I'll return to you at this time, and Sarah will have a son. And Sarah denied it, saying, "I didn't laugh," for she was afraid. But God said, "No, indeed you laughed." It's got, so that's a great record there. And it actually is just such a blessing that he would see that they were struggling with believing to have it. And he comes and he reaffirms that statement, and he deals with Sarah in a very direct way, but a very loving way. that's a wonderful example to us on how we deal with that. You know, if you see somebody struggling with trusting, you know, no matter what it is, and it's the same thing that God said to Sarah can be said to people now. Is there anything too hard for Yahweh? Is there anything too hard for Yahweh? Well, no. The answer is no. So those kinds of phrases build our trust. So it's a good lesson for us to take note of and to use it as we deal with stuff that goes on in life. So we're going to continue here. And because this is such a wonderful record, in verse, let's see here, in the next verse 16, and the men got up from there and looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them on their way. So they got up and looked down on Sodom. Hebron is at a higher elevation. It's not really high. It's I think it's around 3,000 feet. But Sodom and Gomorrah are thought to be lower down. We're near the Great Salt Lake Sea. Some have even thought, if you looked at a map of the Salt Lake Sea, which I showed you earlier, you can see a smaller portion that's separated by a land bridge, a partial land bridge, and there's a shallow portion to the sea on the southernmost end. Some have said that maybe that's hasn't been there all along, and it could be that Sodom and Gomorrah were in that, and then the tremendous change in geography there because of destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah may have changed things. But anyhow, they're definitely downhill. And so we'll continue with the record. Yahweh said, should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham will become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed by him. For I have chosen him, so that he will command his children and his house after him to keep the way of Yahweh by doing what is right and just, so that Yahweh can bring on Abraham what he has spoken concerning him. And Yahweh said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is very grievous, that I will go down now and see what they have done altogether according to the reports that I've come to me. And if not, I will know. So God's going to look firsthand over the situation. And it's interesting, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah. As we look into Sodom and Gomorrah and we see what happened in other parts of the record where they actually came in and the angels came in, and how perverse and deviant the people that lived there. They wanted to have sex with the angels. You know, that's such a wild situation. It's hard for us to believe, but that's what they did. And so much injustice and evil that there would be an outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah. So God decides that he's going to find out for himself. The men turned from there and they went on to Sodom. But Abraham remained standing before Yahweh. So we've got two angels that head towards Sodom, and we got Abraham hanging back in Hebron with Yahweh. And Abraham drew near and said, will you really sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And then he goes through this process of just talking about, well, what if there's 50? Will you save the city? And he just keeps going down. What if there's 45? What if there's 40? You know, what if there's 30? What if there's 20? And then he finally says in verse 32, he said, oh, let the Lord not be angry, and I will speak only this once. What if it's 10 are found there? And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. And Yahweh went on his way as soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So here we have a record of God actually coming into visible form. We know that God is invisible, but we know that he has the power. It has on a number of occasions. There's dozens of times where he's shown himself to men, and he did it here. And whenever he wants to be intimately involved with his created, he can do that. And there's a lot of back and forth on nobody, what is this? This can't be him because it says nobody can see God and live. Well, there's lots of ways to understand that. And we also know that when he showed himself to Moses, he only showed the back part of him, it says. Well, understood that nobody can see, he didn't show the fullness of his glory. We wouldn't be able to comprehend it, but he can manifest himself in ways like he has done as a human being. And so we can relate to that. And he's done that to plenty of people in the Bible. I mean, I could list off a good number of them. He did it with Adam and Eve, and we just read the record with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, also the elders in Moses. Also, he showed himself to Moses, Samuel, Solomon, Micah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Daniel, Stephen, as we all know, the stoning of Stephen, and then, of course, John in the book of Revelation. So you've got many records. So it's not, it's kind of unusual, but sometimes people don't think, I didn't think, really that many times, and sometimes twice to one person. So he does that. And sometimes he shows himself as a man with gray or white hair. And with Ezekiel, he had lots of colors were involved. You can read the first few chapters of Ezekiel. You want to see a very impressive way he showed himself on his chariot throne with the 4 spirit beings, the cherubim, that were his guards, brought him to Ezekiel so they can have a conversation. But it's not uncommon. He did do it, and he did it here with Abraham. So let's continue the story of what else has happened. So that actually happened in Hebron. So it's kind of a wild thing to be in Hebron and to think about God actually set foot here and talked to Abraham with 2 other angels. And we were there. And it just adds something to the story to think, oh, I was there where God actually set foot on ground. And so many of us was, Doug was there and a lot of us were. But the thing is not that we were there so much as it was just such a blessing to be in an area and to think about it. And you can think about it wherever you live, that he actually came into concretion and these wonderful events occurred. And then they move on to Sodom and Gomorrah. And, we know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And it was an example of God actually executing justice at a particular time with cities. And this is meant to be a real warning. And we've been talking a lot about the fear of the Lord. And he shows that there is a consequence. There are consequences to chronic sinful behavior, And this was just amazing amount of sin, but he did this for an example so we can learn from it. That's what happens to evil, and that's what's going to happen to evil eventually. So it's an amazing thing for us to take heed of now, because it wasn't just a freakish event. He's teaching us something. What do we get out of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah? And throughout the Bible, and throughout Proverbs, other places, New Testament, he talks about justice is going to come, and the righteous will live and the unrighteous will not. So it's something to think about. And it's something that motivates us to be able to speak to people, because we want them not to be in the situation of Sodom and Gomorrah. We don't want them to see the lake of fire. See it from the sideline is fine, but not to be in it. And we can do that by helping people, by just speaking the word to them. And as we saw in the movie the other night, the Jesus Revolution, that's what we want now, another revolution. And it doesn't take a vast knowledge of the word to be able to help people get born again, saved, come into a knowledge of the truth. You can do it. We can all do it. We're all capable of doing that. And every time we do that, it just saves them from the fire. It saves them from what they might have to deal with. So let's move on here. In Genesis 23, just a couple chapters down, we're going to talk about Sarah. Here's another event that occurred at Hebron. And let's take a look at verses 23, 1 and 2. Sarah, I think, is the only woman in the Bible that her actual age is given. And I find that interesting because a lot of times women don't want to say their age. And maybe it's biblical. I don't know. But she's the only one where we know how old she was when she died, at least. She's 127. That's pretty good. And these are the years of Sarah's life. And Sarah died in Kirjath Abba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah, to weep for her. Well, they've been married like 100 years, so that's a long time to be together. And I just want to take a moment to talk about this name. The name before Hebron was called this Kirjath Arba, and it was actually named the city of Arba. And Arba was one of the post-flood Nephilim. And later on, we're going to see that Nephilim were in this area of Israel, down in the southern part. The Canaanites and the Philistines, and this is where we're talking about some of the Gath, where Goliath came from. So it was actually named after him. He's probably likely the founder of the city, and he became a very famous person. So that's where the original name came, and then it was changed to Hebron. Sometimes you'll see the Bible refer back to that, and it's talking about the same town of Hebron. And Abraham rose up from before his dead wife and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I'm a stranger and foreigner living among you. As we know, give me a property among you for a burying place so that I may bury my dead out of my sight. Now, he didn't literally want him to give it for free. It's just a way they spoke. It's an enigmatic way of saying, sell me some property. And the sons of Seth answered Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my Lord, you are a mighty ruler among us. Bury your dead in the best of our tombs. None of us will withhold from you his tomb. Bury your dead. And Abraham rose up and bowed down to the people of the land, even to the sons of Seth. These were the owners. And he spoke with them, saying, If it is in your mind that I may bury my dead out of your sight, hear me and entreat Ephron, the son of Zohar, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah that he owns, which is at the end of the field for the full price. Let him give it to me in your presence as a property for a burying place. So we got Ephron, who apparently was one of the group that was influential onto the actual owner. And we're going to get that detail right here in the next verse. Now, Ephron was sitting among the sons of Seth, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the sons of Seth, even as all those who entered the gate of the city, saying, now this is not uncommon. Oftentimes, principals would have others to speak on their behalf. No, my Lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the presence of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead. And Abraham bowed down before the people of the land. And he spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, But if you will, please hear me. I will give you the price of the field. Take it from me, and I will bury my dead. He did not want it free. He wanted to pay for it. Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, My Lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver, what is that between me and you? Bury your dead. These guys weren't striking a hard bargain. They were just continuing to encourage him to take it. And Abraham listened to Ephron. Abraham weighed out to Ephron the silver that he had named in the hearing of the sons of Seth, 400 shekels of silver, according to the current merchant standard. So here we got 400 shekels, which probably is around 10 pounds, what I've read, maybe 10 pounds of silver. So it's not a huge price, but That's what it was. So the field of Ephron that was in Machpelah, which was the east of Mamre, so we're still near Hebron here, the field, the cave that it was in, and all the trees that were in the field that were within its boundaries were deeded over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the son of Heth. Now, it's interesting that the trees were also, and that was not uncommon because back then they would sell land and the trees didn't go with it. It had to be part of the deal because trees were valuable. Before all who entered the gate of the city. And after this, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, east of Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And the field and the cave that it is in were deeded over to Abraham as a possession for burying place by the sons of Heth. So here's the first piece of land and the only piece of land that Abraham owned. But he loved his wife and he wanted her buried. And so he bought some land. He took care of her respectfully. She wasn't buried on the side of the path or out in the field that belonged to someone else. Shows his character, shows his love for his wife. And throughout the Bible, you'll see significance in how people handled their dead. When people that were loved and respected, they were cared for in death. And they made sure they were properly honored and were buried properly. And that's a great example for us today. We honor people when these situations come up. They're difficult situations. But we know what the word says. We know when people pass, we know that as a falling asleep, they're unconscious for what will seem to them an instant. And the next thing, it's the rapture. It's the snatching away. It's Jesus Christ coming for us, and we all get raised. You'll see the people that are disgraced are just left out in the streets. I think Ahab was one. He would be like, he says, I think the word that came to him, he was going to be like a donkey. His death would be like a donkey's. Well, what happened when the donkey died? It was just left wherever it fell. And then the dogs came and the birds would eat it, and that's how it was done. Same thing with Jezebel's wife. She had a disgraceful death and was just left there. So we see that, but we see the contrast here with Abraham and the story of Machpelah. So let's move on to the next record here. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 35. This a few more books away here. 35. Okay, 35, and we're going to look at verse 27. I was amazed about how many things that took place here, or even nearby. We won't go into the record, but Samson actually picked up the gates to the city, and he brought them to a place right nearby Hebron. Here we're going to see where about Isaac, let's look in verse 27. Let's see here. There it is. Jacob came to Isaac, his father, in Mamre to Kiriath Arba. Here it is again, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac lived as foreigners. So we have, it's interesting that Abraham lived in Hebron, Isaac, his son, lived in there, and Isaac's sons Jacob lived there. And the days of Isaac were 180. And Isaac breathed his last and was gathered to his people, old and full of days. And Esau and Jacob, his sons, buried him. Here's another example of people who love you and respect you, taking care of the dead person properly. So we have here we've got Abraham was there, we have Sarah, we have Isaac, and we have Jacob. Now let's take a look at verse 37. All right, and we're going to switch over to chapter 37 here. And we'll look verse 14. And he said in verse 14, and he said to them, go. Now we're looking at Joseph being sold into slavery. And so we know about Jacob, we know about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Joseph. And he said to them, go now, see whether it is well with your brothers and well with the flock, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out to the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. So here we have another famous person. Joseph is involved with this area of Hebron. And it's kind of interesting too, you know, later on we find out, and we won't go into the details of these records, but there was a drought there in Israel. And then Jacob, you know, Joseph is sold into slavery, and we know the story about Joseph and Pharaoh. And then eventually what happens is that Jacob takes his family and they went to Egypt. And Egypt is not the promised land. And God wanted them to stay in the promised land. But they went down there, but it would have been okay probably if they just went there. But they ended up staying there. And they ended up staying there for hundreds of years. And what happened was that God finally had to raise up Moses and to bring them out, bring them back to where the promised land, where God wanted them. So we find out, you know, it's just the humanity not always doing something that looks good and is probably the right thing at the time, but then actually settling there, that was not what they were supposed to live there. And so there's consequences to our decisions. And so they ended up living there for hundreds of years. They became slaves. They got tainted by the religions of Egypt, because the adversary is working overtime, because he knows the Savior is going to come through this particular line, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and eventually Judah. So he populates the area where he knows they're going to go with all these crazy wild people with all their wild religions, just making it more and more difficult for these people. So now we got Jacob there. Now we're going to take a look at we're going to go up to we're going to talk about Moses. So now I just briefly wanted to talk about Jacob and how that how he went into his son went into Egypt. You know, it's a wonderful example. God always is working behind the scenes to do what's good. And so we have this wonderful record of Joseph and Pharaoh, and we know what that means to us. That was such a huge learning, you know, and that was so godly that we have that record so we can see how God operates and how his relationship with his son, God, and Pharaoh and Joseph are like God and Jesus Christ. And we can learn from that record on how they operate together by just seeing how they operated there in Egypt. And that was a wonderful record, but they stayed there. So let's take a look in Numbers chapter 13. Now we're going to move up to Moses' time. So Numbers 13. And we're going to start in verse 1. Now, so Moses, you know, they've just come out of Egypt, and a lot of wonderful things have happened, parting of the Red Sea. They've just witnessed all those different plagues that happened in Egypt. They finally got the go-ahead to leave. They left. The Egyptians pursued. A fire angel, the light came before them, and the sea was parted. They escaped. The Egyptian went unto the sea and was drowned. You have all these tremendous things occurring, and so now they're ready to go into the promised land. I mean, it's not that far from the promised land. When you look on a map from Egypt to the promised land, it's not very far. It's not very far at all. I probably should have looked up the miles, but it shouldn't take 40 years to get there. So that's what I thing. We're going to see why it took 40 years to get there in this particular record. So anyhow, why we're here talking about this is because this is one of the first cities they came to when he sent out the spies is going to be Hebron. So that is how it fits with our whole story here tonight. So look at Yahweh spoke to Moses saying in verse 1, send men that may spy out the land of Canaan, and I will give to the children of Israel that I will give to the children of Israel. Okay, there's a promise right there, right? There it is. I'm going to spy it out. I'm going to give it to the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers, you will send a man, every one a ruler among them. So he tells them how to do it. You're going to send one guy from every tribe. Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the commandments of Yahweh, all the men who were heads of the children of Israel. So you go down and you can read this list. The tribe of Reuben. So he sent Shammua, and you can go down this list, their names. One that I want to point out here is Caleb. He's going to come up again later. All these guys went from their tribe. You know, you've got Shaphath, Caleb, Igal, Hosea, Palti, Gadiel, Manasseh, Gadi, Amiel, Sether, Rabi, Gruel. So you got these guys, and then to that list, these are the names of the men who Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Hosea, the son of Nun, Joshua. So we got Joshua too. So we got Caleb and Joshua. There's Caleb up here, Joshua down here, and all these other guys that represent the tribes of Israel. They're all sending out, they're going to be spies. And then in verse, going down here, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, go up there into the Negev, and that's in that southern portion of Israel, and then go up into the hill country and see the land, what it is, and the people who live in it, whether they are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and what the land is that they live in, whether it's good or bad, what cities are there that they live in, whether they live in camps or in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it's fat or lean, whether there are trees in it or not. Be courageous and bring the fruit of the land. Now, the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. Okay, so that's pretty clear instructions, told them exactly what to do. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob near Lebo Hamath. And they went up to the Negev and came to, here we go, Hebron. One of the first cities they come to is Hebron. And Anaman and Shishaiah and Talmai and the sons of Anak. Sons of Anak. That should, all you Bible folks should think really quick. That's going to be descendants of Nephilim were there. And Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Now, they came to the valley of Eshcol and cut down one from there, a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a staff between two. So you got a staff, you got a piece of wood, you know, kind of like a small log, something like that, and they got a bunch of grapes. So that's quite a huge cluster of grapes. And the place was called the Valley of Eshcol because the cluster of grapes that the children of Israel cut down from there. So at the end of 40 days, now remember this, 40 comes up a lot in the Bible, 40 days. So we're going to look at this a little bit here. And they returned from spying out the land. So these guys spent 40 days in the promised land where God wanted the group to go. So we're going to hear what the report is. Then they went and came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh, and brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him and said, we came to the land where you sent us, and surely it flows with milk and honey. And you've heard me say this before, and you probably all know this, maybe you don't. But the land of milk and honey, I always thought, why do they call it milk and honey? Yeah. And it's kind of interesting, but the land, what it represents, think about this. How much time do you have to put in to getting milk to drink? I mean, it's just however long it takes to milk a cow or a goat, right? So that's easy food. And honey, it's already made. You just get your smoke out, you run the bees off, there you go. So it's like easy food. It's not like you're plowing the ground, throwing out seed, burying the seed, waiting for it to grow. It's not like you're raising cattle. It's a land of milk and honey. You just take it. It's all this stuff is already there for you to take because it was inhabited. And this stuff was supposed to be theirs anyhow. And this is, however, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. Again, okay, these big guys, these are descendants of the Nephilim that showed up after Noah's flood. There were quite a few, but God had put in place a civil law saying that, if a person kills another person, that person has to be put to death. If it's first degree murder or someone does that, then they die. And so that brought order to the civilization then. And it had a very positive effect on keeping the Nephilim. And of course, there's some wars that were fought, and Joshua was very involved in getting rid of them. And David pretty well finished it off. So anyhow, in verse 29, Amalek dwells in the land of the Negev, and the Hittite and the Jebusite and the Amorites dwell in the hill city, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea, and along by the side of the Jordan. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses. And this is what Caleb says. So we remember Caleb was one of the guys that went, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. He's just already knows what God said way up at the top. He says, God had already promised it, right? He says, it's going to be yours. And so he's repeating what basically God, and who wouldn't say that? I mean, look at what God did. I mean, parting the sea, if God's for you, who can be against you, right? It's a no-brainer. I don't care. Doesn't matter how big these guys. But the men who went up with him said, we're not able to go against these people, for they're stronger than we. Well, yeah, they probably are. That's okay. When you got God, it doesn't make any difference. And they went up. There went up an evil report of the land, and they spied out the children of Israel, saying, they go around and murmuring rumors. The land through which we have gone to spy is a land that eats up its inhabitants. And that could be the case. It could be the Nephilims were actually cannibals. It just eats up, in one way or another, it eats up the inhabitants. And all the people who we saw in it are men of great size. And we saw the Nephilim there, sons of Anak, come from the Nephilim. And in our sight, we seem like grasshoppers. And in the way of their sight. So the story continues. And so in verse 1, all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried out, and the people wept that night. I mean, it got to them. These guys passed rumors. They got the whole group into believing that God couldn't take care of them. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness? Why does Yahweh bring us to this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will be a prey. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? And they said to one another, let's appoint a leader and let's go back to Egypt. Oh my gosh. All right. Now we can look back and say, man, oh man, but crazy things happen. Then Moses and Aaron, they just fell on their face before the assembly of the congregation of children of Israel. Now Joshua, the son of Nun, Joshua now is going to get in on the talking, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who were of those who spied out the land, they tore their clothes. And that means they're really bugged. And they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land that we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. This is a whole different story. If
Amen.
Yahweh delights in us, okay, here's the condition. If Yahweh delights in us, well, how does Yahweh delight in people? Well, obedience, trust. That's what, what did God count as righteousness to Abraham? Well, that he believed God, he trusted God, you obey. This is what delight, and he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. So they got it straight, and they rent their clothes because they're upset because this is not right what's going on with all the people of Israel here. Only do not rebel against Yahweh, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection has departed from over them. Who's going to take care of them? Yahweh is with us. Do not fear them. That's where we always want to be. Yahweh with us. And it takes trust, it takes obedience, it takes commitment of the heart. And we fall on our face and we get up again. We know that. We know we're not going to live perfect lives, and we're flawed, and that's okay. God works with us. But all the congregation threatened to stone them. I mean, that is pretty brutal. Okay, Caleb and Joshua are out there telling them the truth, and they pick up stones. Well, we've seen that happen before. It continues to happen. When people speak the truth, sometimes bad things happen. Stoning of Stephen. We saw a lot of things like that. There were Apostle Paul got stoned. But the glory of Yahweh appeared in the tent of the meeting in all Israel. So God's showing up here. So they're about ready to stone these guys. So God shows up. The glory of Yahweh means a bright light. So you got, there's several. So, when you hear the glory of Yahweh, we're usually talking about light, and it gets people's attention. And Yahweh said to Moses, how long will this people treat me with contempt? And that's exactly what they're doing. And how long will they not believe in me for all the signs that I have worked among them? It's a no-brainer. How come? How long will they be contemptuous? And then God says, I know, I will strike them with a pestilence and disinherit them, and will make you, Moses, a nation greater and mightier than they. Well, that's pretty drastic measure. But let's look what Moses does. This is really neat because God's almost giving him a cue. It's time to pray, Moses. It's time to do something here. And Moses says to Yahweh, well, then the Egyptians will hear it. For you brought up this people in your might among them, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. They have heard that you, Yahweh, are in the midst of the people, for you, Yahweh, are seen eye to eye, and your cloud stands over them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you killed this people as one man, the nations that have heard the fame of you will speak, saying, oh, because Yahweh was not able to bring this people into the land that he swore to them, therefore he has slain them in the wilderness. Now, please let the power of the Lord be great, according to as you have spoken, saying, Yahweh is slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, forgiving iniquity and disobedience, and that will be by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children on the third and fourth generation. So now we have a clarity here in a thing where God doesn't have to be reminded of this. He knows it, but Moses takes a stand. He stands in the gap. He just takes a stand for God's people. And this is really wonderful. And Moses is such a wonderful man. It says he's the meekest man. Nobody has been meeker than him. And Yahweh said, I have pardoned according to your word. Oh, right then and there, he offers forgiveness on the prayer of this man. And, that tells me, and we've seen lots of records in the Bible, we can ask for the forgiveness of others. We can stand for them. We saw this when Jesus Christ was being crucified on the cross. He pardoned them. And then when Stephen was being stoned, lay not this sin to their charge. And so this is a great lesson for us, that we not only ask forgiveness for ourselves, but we ask forgiveness for others. If you read Daniel and his prayer to God, he owns up to being sinful and the whole country being sinful. Okay to pray for forgiveness for others as well as ourselves. But truly as I live, as all the earth be filled with the glory of Yahweh, because all those men who have seen my glory, my signs that I worked in Egypt and in the wilderness, have been tempted me these 10 times and have not listened to my voice. Surely they will not see the land that I swore to their fathers. Okay, so he's going to forgive them, but that doesn't always remove consequences. There's the other part of the story. Just when you sin, there are consequences. God will forgive, but here comes the consequences. Surely they will not see the land. So he's telling them what's going to happen because of this, nor will any of those who despised me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he had another spirit with him and has followed me fully, I will bring him into the land into which he sent, and his seed will possess it. Now the Amalekite and the Canaanite dwell in the valley. Tomorrow turn and go into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. Okay, so now we've got a change in plan. Instead of going into the promised land, they're making a turn. Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, how long must I bear this evil congregation that murmur against me? I've heard the murmurings of the children of Israel, that they murmured against me. We just read about it just a few verses up. Tell them, as I live, says Yahweh, surely as you have spoken in my ears, so I will do to you. He's going to turn it. Your dead bodies will fall in the wilderness, and all who were, here we go, there's 3 things here to make note of. All who were numbered of you according to your whole number, that's one category, from 20 years old and upward, that's one other category, and who murmured against me. There's 3 things: being numbered, being 20 years old and up, and murmured. Surely you will not come into the land concerning which I swore that I would make you dwell in it, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. Those are the 2 guys who gave the good report. They're the ones that were believing God, trusting God, and the others did not. But so we're talking about people 20 years and upward. So we're not talking about people under 20. And in the whole number, when Moses took the census, he didn't take the census of the women. So the women weren't included. So probably they weren't included in this. Pretty much the whole group, a lot, if not all the whole group, murmured against him. We know a couple who did not, but your little ones that you said would be their prey. Remember, they just read that. They said, if they go in there, they're going to kill our kids. He says, I will bring them in. That would be in this under 20-year-old group. And they will know the land that you have rejected. So they're going to get in, you're not. You guys have murmured, you guys, but as for you, your dead bodies will fall in the wilderness. Well, how's that going to happen? Your children will be wanderers in the wilderness for 40 years. They'll just get old and die. So 40 years, and will bear your prostitution until your dead bodies be consumed in the wilderness. According to the number of days that you spied out in the land, remember that? They went in 40 days. For every day a year, you will bear iniquities, even 40 years, and you will know my alienation. I, Yahweh, have spoken. If I do this to all the evil congregation who gathered together against me in this wilderness, they will be consumed and they will die. The men of Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made the congregation to murmur against him by bringing evil report on this land. Even those who brought up evil report on the land died by the plague before Yahweh. So now we're talking about those other, I think it was 10 guys. They died by the plague before Yahweh. But Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, remained alive, for those men went to spy out the land. So that's a great lesson to us. Now, I know I know this is kind of a huge expansion on, we're talking about Hebron, but that was the first city they went to. And this is such a wonderful record, and it's so full of stuff that we'll learn, why the 40 years, when it should have taken maybe weeks to get there. Well, that's why these people these are the people that were against God. These are the people that were turned people away from God. These are people that needed to be weeded out. And so God was very loving. He just let them live their life and then die. And it wasn't like he just took and killed them all. He just let them live the life and waited it out until they died. And so, okay, so now we're going to wrap things up here pretty quick here. I want to just take a few minutes here to take a look at, we're going to switch to 2 Samuel chapter 11. And again, we're talking about people in Hebron. We're in chapter 11, and we're going to look at verse 2. And now we have another famous Bible person. So we had all these others. Now we got in 2 Samuel 2, David arose from his bed, walked on the roof of the king's house. Wait just a minute. Not that record. I want to go down to 7. Okay. I'm in 2 Samuel. Am I there? 2 Samuel. Oh, I'm in the wrong chapter. Oops. I went to chapter 11 when it's verse 11 in chapter 2. So chapter 2, verse 11. And the length of time David was king in Hebron. So the first years of David's 40-year reign is actually in Hebron. So he reigned in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. And this is the southern kingdom, which consisted of Judah and Benjamin. The northern kingdom we'll see more about here later on. Let's take it. Chapter 5 of the same book here. And we'll look in verse 1. All the tribes of Israel came to David to Hebron. Again, we're here, David's in Hebron, and spoke, saying, behold, we are your bone and your flesh. In times past, when Saul was king over us, it was you who led out and brought in Israel. Yahweh said to you, you will shepherd my people, Israel, and you will be ruler over Israel. Now, that was a long time ago. David could have been like 15 or so, a young man when he was called. So all the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron. Now he's about, I think he's 30 years old. Yeah. And Hebron, and King David cut a covenant with them in Hebron before Yahweh, and they anointed King David over Israel. David was 30 when he began to reign, and he reigned a total of 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. In Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years over all of Israel and Judah. At first, the 10 other tribes were under a different king, but eventually it became united, and that's what he did. So now we've got all these wonderful people. We've got David. Now, not so positive situation later on. One of David's sons, as a result of what happened, because what he did with Bathsheba, there was a consequence to that. God forgave him for it, but there was a consequence, and the consequence was that child would die, and there would also be problems within the relationships within his family. And there's lots, if you can read about them, there's a ton of stuff that things just went haywire inside the family, and to the point where Absalom wanted to be king, and he tried to overthrow his father, and he tried to do it here in Hebron. So, and then later on, we also have Aaron and the priests also live in Hebron. So Hebron is a huge, very, very famous story. And it's not something we talk about. We know Jerusalem, Bethlehem. There's a lot of cities that we know. And, but Hebron is a very famous city and was witness to many, many wonderful acts of God, both very positive and some consequential. There's a lot of things to be learned from the stories of the Old Testament, a lot of things that apply today. And, you know, God tells us that his desire is for us to know and understand him. And we read these records, we get to see how God thinks. You know, and that's how we want to think. You know, how does God think in situations? Sometimes and we learn to fear God because his justice can be harsh. You know, as I said earlier, when Noah got off after the flood, God told him real quick how you deal with people who kill people. It's life for life. And if you read the civil law, there are things that need to be done. And they don't fit with the way we've been raised necessarily. Maybe they do. But the things that our goal is to make sure that we are constantly working to, as much as possible, to know and understand God and to put on this. And then Jesus Christ read all these records. This is a huge point. He saw all this stuff. He saw the 40 years. He saw the 40 days. He saw the people who stood with God, the results of Caleb and Joshua, and he saw the results of those who didn't. He saw about the 40 years. All these things he put into his heart, and it was his book. That's what he read day in and day out. So it's a wonderful record. And I think if we read it like Jesus read it, try to put ourselves into that position, that this is his rule book. And these rules, I mean, there's so many things in the Old Testament that apply today. We know we don't sacrifice some of those particular laws were done away with Christ, but the other civil laws, we would be wise to heed them. So it's been a pleasure to be with you here tonight. Thank you for hanging in there with me. I don't think I went maybe 5 minutes over time. I tried to be very respectful of your time because I know we all have things to do, and so grateful that you decided to spend the time tonight here, and thankful for all that. So I'm going to close with a word of prayer, and if we want to talk about anything, we can sure do that. So Heavenly Father, Lord Jesus Christ, you are a wonderful, loving Father. And we're so thankful to know what we know of the word. Thank you for the blessing it is to see how you worked back then and how you loved back there, and your kind of love, and to understand it. We're thankful for the examples of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the things they did right and the things that they did wrong that we can learn from them. They were not perfect people. They were flawed like us, and they dealt with the same sin nature that we deal with. But yet they're wonderful examples, and they come through over and over, and you'd come through for them. So we ask you just to help us to live our lives as godly as we can, to protect us, and for your love for us and your forgiveness. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
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 AJ, that was excellent.